A 67-year-old man from Ohio sold his house, bought a $148,000 Sprinter conversion, and drove to the California coast. His retirement plan, built over 2 decades, assumed he'd sleep free in coastal cities 4 nights out of 7. He lasted 11 weeks before he called the dealer, not because the van broke down, because every city he wanted to park in had already logged his plate on night 1, and enforcement followed by night 3. His monthly costs ran $900 over what he budgeted. He didn't lose his van, he lost the retirement he designed around it. That story is not a warning about van life. It's a warning about buying a van without understanding what 2026 actually looks like on the ground. In this video, I'm going to give you the real breakdown of what is actually happening with stealth camping laws in 2026 in the USA and across Europe, not the romanticized version you see from influencers who are paid to make van life look effortless. I'm going to show you exactly which regions have gotten measurably harder, where the legitimate gray areas still exist, what surveillance infrastructure is being deployed that most buyers do not know about, and most importantly, how this should affect your decision on whether to buy a camper van right now and which type you buy. Because if you buy the wrong van with the wrong features for the wrong regions, you are going to spend a significant amount of money on a vehicle that actively works against your lifestyle. Let's get into it. The enforcement shift. Let's start with what has actually changed, because stealth camping is getting harder is something people have been saying for a decade. The question is whether 2026 is genuinely different, or just more of the same slow tightening. It is genuinely different, and here is why. The legal framework was always patchwork, city by city, county by county in the US, municipality by municipality in Europe. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the enforcement infrastructure behind those laws. You can have a law on the books for 20 years that was essentially unenforced because it required a human officer to notice a van, walk over, and run a check. That friction was your protection. That friction is now being removed at scale. Flock Safety, founded in Atlanta in 2017, has become the dominant vendor in automated license plate recognition in the U.S. By mid-2026, they report over 100,000 deployed cameras across more than 5,000 communities in 49 states. These are not red light cameras waiting for a moving violation. Every plate that passes a Flock camera is logged, timestamped, and stored, searchable by any officer with query access whether or not the vehicle is suspected of anything. Here's what that means in practical terms. You park on a residential street Monday night. You come back Tuesday and Wednesday. On Thursday morning, a neighbor calls to complain. The officer who responds doesn't need to catch you sleeping. The system already shows your plate at that address on 3 consecutive nights. The law didn't change, the evidence collection did. In 2026, stealth camping isn't about hiding from people, it's about hiding from software, and most vans can't do that. Write that down, because everything else in this video flows from it. A 2026 report highlighted that these systems are already being used beyond their original stated purpose. In one documented case from December 2025, a Georgia State Patrol citation explicitly read, "captured on Flock camera," for an infraction that had nothing to do with the vehicle itself. Mission creep is not coming, it's here. This is the conversation nobody is having on Van Life YouTube. Everyone is talking about whether stealth camping is technically legal. The more relevant question for a buyer in 2026 is whether the enforcement gap that made it practically viable has closed, and in major US metro areas, the answer is yes. Most buyers hear that and immediately think go smaller, go less obvious, go cargo spec, white van, no markings, blend in. That instinct is understandable. It is also exactly backwards, and it has cost buyers more money in 2026 than almost any other single van life decision. The U.S. law landscape. In the United States, there is no federal law against sleeping in your vehicle. Let me be clear about that. This is not a federal issue. Legality depends on where you park, not what you are doing inside the vehicle. Most U.S. cities regulate overnight parking through local municipal ordinances, not state law. The same van parked overnight on a side street in Bozeman, Montana may draw zero attention. The same spot in Santa Monica, California could result in a citation before sunrise. That gap has widened in 2026. 7 states have been identified as tightening rules specifically on overnight sleeping at rest areas and state facilities. The changes aren't banning it outright, they're eliminating the gray area. Michigan updated rules for roadside facilities to set a maximum continuous stay of 48 hours and paired it with an explicit no camping standard. Overnight parking is technically allowed, but setting out gear, dumping trash, or treating the lot like a campsite triggers action. Vermont law now applies what regulators call a purpose test. A brief stop to recover from travel fatigue is treated differently from settling in for the night with the intent to camp. When intent looks like overnight lodging, enforcement can follow even if no tent appears. What this tells you as a buyer is that the rules are shifting from behavior-based to intent-based, and intent-based enforcement is much harder to navigate in a van that looks like someone lives in it. This is where your van choice becomes a direct financial decision. A standard cargo conversion with no external clues, no roof vents, no solar panels visible, no curtains showing from outside, still passes the practical test in most mid-sized U.S. cities. A heavily built, roof-raised, solar-paneled conversion with external wiring visible in the wheel arches tells enforcement exactly what they're looking at before they've even run your plate. Campground fees in 2026 are averaging $25 to $50 per night. Van lifers who can't stealth effectively report spending $500 to $1,500 per month on camping costs they didn't budget for. If you buy a van that prevents you from stealth camping in the areas you plan to travel, you have just added a hidden operational cost to your purchase that was never on the sticker. Now let's go to Europe, because the situation there is measurably worse, and if you're planning a European van trip or living abroad, you need to hear this before you make a purchase decision. Petra and her husband Marcus had been planning their European van retirement trip for 6 years. Portugal, Spain, the south of France, the whole coastline. They bought a converted Volkswagen Craver, kept it small and discreet, and flew over in January. By April, they had €840 in fines across 3 countries, had been turned away from 2 heirs because their van didn't qualify as a registered motorhome, and were spending more per month on campgrounds than they would have spent on a small apartment in Lisbon. The van was fine. The plan was built on a legal reality that no longer existed. Europe used to be the dream. Spain, France, Portugal, van lifers would paint a picture of pulling up to a clifftop spot, watching the sunset, sleeping for free, driving on in the morning. That picture is not entirely wrong, but the frame has gotten a lot smaller. Spain introduced Instruction PROT 2026/04 in March 2026, which formally banned wild camping across 7 regions, including Andalusia, Galicia, and Valencia, and tightened coastal restrictions across the whole country. These are not rural backwaters. These are the most popular van life destinations in Europe.
Greece passed a strict overnight camping ban in 2025, then partially walked it back a few months later. The current position still bans overnight stays on beaches, in forests, at archaeological sites, and in public car parks, with on-the-spot fines of €300. In the UK, the change is happening at the local level but being made permanent. North Yorkshire authorities moved to make permanent the ban on overnight campervan parking in Scarborough and along the A174 coastline in spring 2026, following an 18-month trial and over 3,000 public responses. Experimental traffic regulation orders, temporary rules councils can introduce quickly to trial a restriction, have been used at 3 North Yorkshire seafront spots and then converted to permanent bans. That is the mechanism spreading across the UK coast: trial restriction, public comment period, permanent ban. Across the EU, there is no unified law. It is a patchwork of national traffic codes, municipal ordinances, and public space regulations. But the practical result of that fragmentation is that fines of up to €350 in France and impoundments in Barcelona and Amsterdam have caught van lifers who believed they were compliant. Germany fines between €35 and €100 for stealth sleeps within city limits. That sounds manageable until you understand that fixed ANPR cameras, Europe's equivalent of flock safety, have been standard infrastructure in German, French, and UK cities for years. The logging technology predates the US rollout. Here is the nuance that matters for buyers. Europe did not simply ban van life, it redirected it. France has over 5,000 designated airs, motorhome stopovers with basic facilities. Germany has over 3,500 Stellplätze. The countries that are cracking down on stealth parking are simultaneously building out the infrastructure for legal, affordable alternatives. The countries cracking down on stealth parking are simultaneously building out the legal alternatives. The mistake isn't that you want to park free. The mistake is buying a van that can't access the system that replaced free parking. That changes the product you should be buying. If Europe is your primary market, you do not need a van optimized for stealth. You need a van with gray water capacity, a self-contained toilet system, and the right registration class to access those sites legally. The optimal van build for European legal overnight parking looks completely different from the optimal van build for US urban stealth camping. This is exactly the kind of decision that separates buyers who are happy with their vans in year 3 from buyers who resell at a loss at year 1. The counterintuitive insight. Here is the thing nobody on Van Life YouTube will say out loud because it breaks the aesthetic. The stealth van is a 2018 product being sold in a 2026 market. The entire stealth van concept was built on one assumption, that human enforcement required human observation. A small, unmarked van blends into parked traffic, nobody notices, nobody checks. That assumption was load-bearing. Remove it, and the logic of the stealth build collapses. Cameras don't see a white cargo van, they see a plate. And a plate attached to 3 consecutive overnight stays in a prohibited zone is not stealthy, regardless of how anonymous the van looks. The size of your wheelbase is completely irrelevant to the technology now enforcing these laws. What the smaller stealth van actually costs you is interior capacity, battery bank space, water storage, the ability to be genuinely self-contained. And self-containment is the actual currency of legal van life in 2026. In many European countries, sleeping inside a legally parked vehicle is treated more leniently than turning the space into a campsite. The moment your footprint extends beyond the vehicle, chairs, awnings, cooking gear, the legal situation often gets significantly worse. A fully self-contained larger van, a Ford Transit high-roof long wheelbase, a Mercedes Sprinter 170, a Ram ProMaster 3500 extended that can park legally, keep everything inside, and access the designated motorhome networks, is now a more legally viable vehicle than a compact stealth build that forces you to cook outside, use public toilets, and generate the external footprint that gets you flagged. The key legal distinction across Europe is between parking and camping. Sleeping inside a legally parked self-contained vehicle is treated fundamentally differently than establishing an outdoor campsite. The moment you deploy an awning or set up external gear, that legal distinction collapses. The smaller, stealthier van that can't contain your full living setup is, in 2026 legal terms, riskier than the larger van that can. That is counterintuitive. That is also why buyers who rely on influencer content from 2020 are making purchasing decisions based on an enforcement reality that no longer exists. The practical buyer framework. Let me show you 2 buyers, same budget, same timeline, same dream. Buyer 1 reads van life content from 2022, buys a compact cargo conversion in 2024, drives to California coast, the Pacific Northwest, and then plans a European leg. By year 2, they've accumulated over $2,000 in fines and tow fees, spend most nights in paid campgrounds they didn't plan for, and are seriously considering selling. The van works perfectly. The strategy doesn't. Buyer 2 does the same research, but in 2025, and specifically looks at where enforcement is moving. Buys a long wheelbase, self-contained build with gray water, onboard toilet, and a battery bank that runs 3 days without shore power. Parks legally, accesses the Airs and Stellplätze networks in Europe, spends less per month on overnight costs than Buyer 1, and still has a van that works for full-time life at year 3. Same dream, different information, completely different financial outcome. The only variable is what they knew before they signed the purchase agreement. So here is the framework. Buy a campervan optimized for stealth if you are primarily operating in rural areas, secondary cities, and BLM and national forest land in the western United States. Dispersed camping on BLM land and in national forests remains broadly legal and free. Small towns in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, the Colorado Plateau, these are still viable in ways that coastal metros are not. If this is your primary operating territory, a lower profile build still makes sense, but understand you are making a regional bet, not a universal one. If you plan urban U.S. van life, understand that stealth in major cities with active flock safety networks, which now covers the majority of metro areas on the East Coast, California, Texas, and the Pacific Northwest, is a risk management exercise, not a legal cover. Go in with that clarity, or don't go in at all. Do not buy a campervan optimized for stealth if your primary plan involves coastal Europe. The most popular van life destinations in Europe, Spain's Andalusia and Valencia coast, Greek beaches, public car parks anywhere, now carry real financial penalties. Your camping strategy has been disrupted at the destination level, not just the parking level. A van built purely for invisibility will cost you money in the exact places you want to spend your time. And do not rely on stealth in urban U.S. markets where plate reading networks are active. The enforcement gap is functionally closed in those markets. You are not beating the system. You are hoping it doesn't get around you. What to actually buy in 2026? For the U.S. buyer planning mixed rural and secondary city travel, long wheelbase, high roof, cargo spec, neutral color, proper self-contained interior. Not for stealth, for self-sufficiency. Your ability to stay 72 hours without needing external services is worth more than your ability to look like a random parked vehicle. For the Europe buyer, a registered motorhome or a Type B converted campervan with gray water, fresh water, and onboard toilet. Apps like Park for Night, iOverlander, and Camper Contact now have hundreds of thousands of legal overnight stops, many of them free or under €15 per night. The network of legal overnight spots is genuinely good if your vehicle qualifies to use it. If it doesn't, if you're in an unmarked cargo conversion without proper self-containment, you are locked out of that entire ecosystem and paying campground rates by default. The retirees and couples I hear from most often made one version of the same mistake. They bought for stealth because they were scared of paying camping fees, and they ended up paying more in fines, in unplanned campgrounds, and eventually in a resale on a van that didn't work for the life they actually lived. Conclusion. Here's where I land. 5 years ago, the smartest van buyer asked, "How do I avoid paying for campgrounds?" That question drove an entire market. Compact builds, cargo conversions, low-profile rooflines, everything optimized to be invisible. In 2026, that question is the wrong question. It optimizes for a problem that technology has already solved against you. The smartest buyer in 2026 asks a completely different question. How do I make stealth camping irrelevant to my budget? Those are two completely different vans, two completely different builds, two completely different financial outcomes at year 3. The buyers asking the first question are listing their vans right now. The buyers who asked the second question are still on the road. Which question are you starting with? Drop it in the comments. Tell me, are you buying to stay hidden or buying to stay legal? Your answer tells me whether your current plan survives contact with 2026. I read every comment, and I'll tell you directly.